Don't chase the shiny object. The hard thing is about that restraint, and then trying to find who are the people that we want to put out there. And because I do believe this, that news, just mass news, is noise. Experts are signals.
Welcome to another episode of Chief Influencer. I'm your host, Anthony Shop, co-founder of Social Driver. Let's face it, Washington is the center of influence in the US and arguably in the world. Chief Influencer features leaders who have figured out how to break through in today's fragmented and fast-changing environment. Social Driver teamed up with the Communications Board and the George Washington University College of Professional Studies to recognize these incredible leaders as chief influencers and highlight how they inspire and influence others. Thanks to Finya, Kara, the other colleagues here, the ambassador at the Austrian Embassy, for your hospitality. We're just so grateful that you opened up your doors for us. And I just have to say, for me, this is especially sort of special, poignant place to be because my great-grandparents immigrated to the United States from Austria, from villages that were about an hour apart. They never met until they ended up in Kansas City. And they realized that they were both from villages outside of Vienna. And when I was 18, I had the opportunity to go back and visit both of those villages and meet my long-lost relatives. So to be here today at the Embassy of Austria and to have strudel out, I hope some of you had a chance to try that, is very special. So thank you. So my name is Anthony Shop. I'm the co-founder of Social Driver, and I chair the National Digital Roundtable. And I'm also a former journalist. So I'm very excited about today's conversation focused on the future of news, because we need to talk about how people actually discover information now. We all know it's changing so much, and how they decide, how all of us decide what to trust, how creators like Tony are changing the media ecosystem, how journalists like Jenny are adapting to new platforms, how AI is changing what gets produced, what gets summarized, what gets valued. And I think we all know AI is making the production of content cheaper and faster. It's becoming more of a commodity these days. And that increases the premium on information that's verified, that's useful, that's human, that's contextual, that's trustworthy. So that means judgment, source relationships, community trust, and lived experience are more valuable than ever. So we're going to explore some big questions today, and we will open it up for you all to ask your own questions too. But what happens when people trust individuals more than institutions? What happens when the face becomes just as important, maybe more important than the logo? What happens when audiences are overwhelmed and they're forced to use shortcuts, which might be identity, habit, platform, personality, so that they can decide what to believe? And then what happens when news is no longer something that we go looking for, but something that finds us through TikTok, through Instagram, newsletters, podcasts, AI summaries, creators, etc. So we have a really incredible panel today. From my left here, we have Jenny Abamu, who's the Maryland politics reporter at WAMU, a well-respected, trusted journalist in the public media sphere, who, unlike many public media journalists, has been, before dipping your toe, but now really establishing your place on platforms like TikTok. So from traditional media to new media. We have Tony Polcari. You may know him as TonyPinDC. And several years ago, Tony sort of got on the scene in DC by sharing sort of lifestyle updates, the life of a bachelor in DC. And next thing you know, the NATO is calling Tony saying, hey, we have our summit and we want you to help amplify what's going on, because most Americans don't know what NATO is, and we want to get that message out. And now Tony, you will see frequently on TV. He has his own show on Fox 5. So new media that has transitioned in a way to traditional media. We have Katerina Eva Matsa, and Kat is with Pew Research. And you know that organization is the gold standard in research on things like internet usage, media literacy, media consumption habits. And so Kat is going to tell us, what does the data say about all of these trends that we're talking about, and what does that mean for us? And then lastly, we have my friend Peter Cherukuri. Peter has had a really incredible career across media. One of the things most people might know him for is really helping to build Politico to the juggernaut that it became and is. But he's worked with a number of other organizations as well. And in his role with LeaderForce right now, he is working on projects such as the two-way podcast, which combines the kind of old media approach of talk radio, very interactive, and bringing that into the digital world. So you can tell we have a lot to cover today, and I want to really quickly transition it over to our panel because you're here to hear from them, not from me. Jenny, I introduced you saying that you made this transition from being a public media journalist to now having a presence on platforms like TikTok. And I want to ask you to talk a little bit about trust. How have you been able to transfer the trust that you've been able to gain from the traditional media world? People who hear you, I'm an avid NPR and WAMU listener. I have the NPR app. When I'm in my car, I have it on the radio. It's the only thing it's tuned to. People who trust you there, but then maybe now have found you on social platforms, but vice versa. I know people are finding you on social platforms that say, I don't normally listen to NPR, but I love what you do. So talk about that kind of transition of trust and building trust in today's ecosystem, if you will.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you everyone for coming out here today. I think this is a fascinating and timely discussion. And yes, trust really the gold coin here. I think when it comes to the media agent this time, people are flooded with information, some from AI, some from all these algorithms, all these people that are online, and it is hard to understand what is real, what is not real, what is true, what is fake. I'm sure that everyone's mom or grandparent at this point has sent you an AI video that they thought was real, and you have to be like, nope, that's not. And so we are at a time when there is a premium on trust and information that you know where it came from and you know who it came from. And so that's something that I do intentionally lead with in all of my videos. When I started when I started doing things on TikTok, it was really and Instagram I do, but it was really an experiment. And I thought to myself, I was looking at the data from Pew Research actually, and it was showing how you could see the trends of the numbers of people who are going to get their information from from different places. And so if I did a huge investigation or some random story, I realized that there was a large part of the audience that did not hear that story. They didn't hear it when it was on air, and they weren't checking WMU's website. And with AI, not even checking websites even less. And so I thought to myself, how do I begin to show up where people are? Because that you have to go. For me, I'm a numbers girl, and so you'll see that in my reporting, and you'll also see that with how I find where my audience is. And so my thought process was to reach them where that was and to be a little bit more of myself there. And so that is a weird kind of thing where I kind of study, how does this algorithm work? And layer that with, okay, who am I really? Can I bring my authentic self as much as possible to this? I'm not bringing my opinions because that's not what I'm there for, but I am able to talk the way I normally talk. I don't care if I stumble or say on or have to like repeat myself a couple of times, I try not to do it too much because I don't want to ruin the fluency, of course, but I allow those errors to be there because I think there is something about feeling like you're talking to a human, feeling like you're with a human, and that there is a premium that will be put on humans as AI becomes more prolific in our society. And so yeah, I do try and lead with myself as I introduce who I am to the audience every single time with almost every video. And I introduce a platform that I work for because I think I want them to know where this information is coming from. And then even on my videos, you'll notice that I often will clip original sources. And so even if I tell you there's a stat that I got, I will put that on the video. It'll be there for like 10 seconds and you can pause it, but you can always check and see, okay, this is where she got her information. So I think it's really important that if people want, they can dig into what I do. They can see where I got this fact or whatever it might be from. I oftentimes will put quotes from people who I've interviewed. I'll put sound bites from them within that. And so my goal is to at least show you the work. So you know that I got here, how I got to this place and how I got to this, story. And you're able to see that within the 90-second clips that I give you.
And let me ask you a follow-up on that, Jenny, because we had a roundtable once where you shared some of your approach and some things that changed in terms of how you show up on social media. So when you are producing a story to go on WAMU, or maybe it's even syndicated, at other stations, you get to put it on when it's finished. But you talked a little bit about how you can share things that are maybe unfinished or, on your journey on social platforms, and it's a way to engage your audience. Can you share a little bit more about that and
Oh,
how that
yeah.
works?
Oh, this was fun. For some of the data center coverage that I've done, I FOIA'd data center developments in Montgomery and Prince George's counties because they weren't telling me what they were doing, and so I had to go back and figure that out. But I did tell the audience, I don't know what I'm gonna get. I'm just gonna send out these FOIAs. I'm sitting there, in my living room in my sweatshirt, and I kind of show them a little bit about, okay, these are the things that I'm doing to get to this story. So sometimes I'll say, I think that this is happening. I'm not sure, but I'm going to send out a FOIA. This is what I'm putting out to. Hopefully they'll get back to me. This is usually the process that I deal with your county when I try to get information. And so sometimes I do tell people, this is a process, and I let them then later on, like maybe 2 or 3 weeks later, or whenever they get back to me, or even if they don't get back to me, I love calling people out. So I will say, I'm very, very transparent about that. People who, and I'll say, of course, yeah, I reached out to X person. They, didn't get back to me, or yeah, they're trying to charge me this much money to get this information. Because I do think people should know, like you should know what your laws are doing. You should know how they're written. You should know how transparent or non-transparent the information in your community is, and how hard it is for your local reporter to get it. And so I do try and do a little bit of that, because I think that is also allows people to go on the journey with you, and people love doing that. And they'll give you suggestions too in the comments, or somebody might even have the document and they want you to have it, and they'll reach out. So I have had stuff like that happen before, so that's pretty cool.
And I know, as a listener on terrestrial radio, but also as a follower of yours, knowing what's coming, knowing what you're working on behind the scenes, I think it's a really great way to build trust, to show people what you're doing. Because sometimes we just see the final headline, And so I think that's a great lesson that all of us can take back. So thanks for going behind the curtain a little bit. Tony, I want to turn it to you. So again, you have a journey that's a little bit of a mirror image of Jenny's, because you started sharing on social media kind of your life of a bachelor in DC, giving people that behind the scenes in your home, maybe making some salmon or going out and about. And then you really started to build trust with audiences, loyal following. And then NATO calls you up and asks you to cover their summit and show up there. Now you're on Fox 5 and you're doing all kinds of great stuff there. What have you learned about building trust through the face, not the logo, the persona, and what can media organizations learn from your journey and your lessons?
It's a really good question. I think, and I look at this word like I look at reasonable doubt, authenticity. No one really knows what it means. Lawyers will say, what does reasonable doubt really mean? It's kind of this general word that we talk about. And authenticity is that main foundation of how we're seeing, I would say, creators become journalists. I don't consider myself a journalist yet because I have a lot of work to do about writing and sourcing and having the guts to ask the tough questions. So I'm working on that. But I think for journalists who are doing more creative work on the social side now too, it's about being relatable in other things besides what you're doing for that work, right? So if you look at Don Lemon, for example, who is a great journalist at CNN, he's transitioned to his own independent media empire. And a lot of that is because he does man-the-street interviews. He's out there. He's consistent. He also has some commentary about things in his life and things about pop culture. And people start to really like him as a presenter, as a person. They love his insights. And I think the trust is not just built, okay, I'm presenting the news to you today through social media. Because years ago, you had Walter Cronkite, Connie Chung, those type of anchors. They did the news and that was their whole thing. That wouldn't work today, I don't think. And we're seeing with traditional media, it's not really working. You have to have this outside presence where people know, hey, who is this anchor outside of this? What are their opinions on this pop culture thing? Maybe not have it blend in with their journalism too much, but what are they doing outside of their life, the behind the scenes stuff? Talking about their life, their struggles. That works and that matters to people. They want to know what's in your heart and what's going into your head, because that's true authenticity. And when they can connect with you, and the biggest thing is relatability, when they can relate to you and go, hey, I've had that part of my life just like yours. I've experienced that too. I have family going through that. And you openly talk about that. That level of vulnerability can be very helpful when trying to tell the news story, because now it is about personality. It really is about, do I trust this person giving me the news? Do I have some type of foundational relation or relatability to them?
Tony, let me ask you, when I talk to folks who are in their 20s and in their 30s, what they tend to say about their trust in news, and we'll get the research from this
Yeah,
about
of
this in a
course.
second, they say the anchor I see on TV is saying what the company wants them or is allowing them to
Oh, yeah.
say. But when
Yeah.
I follow a creator, whether that's Aaron Parnas on Substack or whether that's
Yes.
they see something from you, I think this person believes it. And I don't care if there's some bias because I want to know what they really believe. And
Right.
that there's that trust gap with institutional media. Are you seeing that? I mean, is that an accurate depiction of what your generation is perhaps
Yes.
feeling with media?
Oh, absolutely. And I think it even translates to creators. So whenever creators will do ads, I do a lot of brand endorsements. There's the term of being called a sellout, where like you sold out to the corporations, you sold out to this. And it's the same thing with news and journalism. I think a lot of younger generations view the institutions, whether it be the Iraq War, whether it be things like 9/11 or things like the '08 financial crisis, all that volatility, the traditional media sort of sat by and said, well, this war is going okay. And they kind of had to correct themselves. And there's a lot of this potential collusion as they see it between the government at the time and the news media. So now they want things that are unfiltered. And in a lot of ways, younger audiences view kind of standing up against the system and being open about that and saying the hottest take, maybe taking a news story and really going in on the hottest take or something that's controversial. That really works. And having controversy or being against the grain is a major entry point for a lot of people who are creators to become journalists and for, kind of vice versa. And we're seeing with, traditional journalists now who are saying their opinion a lot more. This is maybe a hot take, but I don't think that people care as much if you have an opinion on something anymore, even if you are a news presenter or a journalist, because our audiences are so siloed now that if you have a more political perspective on a certain way, you may, gravitate towards someone who's going to have some more liberal takes, for example, or conservative takes, and you'll trust the news source because, hey, they were open about their position. And even some that are independent, they may say, at least this person's honest about what they're saying. Maybe I can trust them on a certain level because they're not saying they're neutral and then pretending that they're not. A little bit. Again, I could be totally wrong, but I think that's what I'm seeing among like my age. Like I'm 27. I'm seeing that if you're against the system and you kind of show that consistently, you can get away with some opinions.
Okay, so what does the research tell us? So, Kat, Pew is the gold standard when it comes to this type of research. I would love to hear what you're finding about how trust is shifting, how media consumption is shifting, and maybe insights that, I mean, I know you all don't make recommendations, you really stick to the data, but perhaps some things that you're seeing that we could use to make our own decisions.
How much time do I have? First of all, thank you for this great space. I'm just going to say, as a fellow European, it's always very nice to be at the fellow European embassy. Let's step back, right, and look at the whole news ecosystem and how it has been transformed in the past 20, 30 years, because there's a lot of developments that they have happened. It's not just trust. There's other pressures that have been taking place from technological changes that they're happening. I know we even sprinkled the word AI right now, but there's way more than that has happened. The business model of the news business, right, of all the newsrooms, the reductions in staffing, right? There's a lot of pressures that have taken place the past 20 years that news organizations and journalists are facing day in and day out. So when you're taking all of this together, right, where is that news consumer today? That news consumer is basically in a constant negotiating phase, right? We're asking them to be there, bombarded with information. We talked about overload, asked every day to assess that every piece of information that they're being exposed to, whether intentionally or unintentionally, to trust, right? Whether that's an individual or a news organization, that's a lot. And a lot of what we're finding in our research is this feeling of feeling overwhelmed and feeling tired and sometimes checked out, right? So that's the environment that we're living in. And then on top of that, there are structural changes, right? You mentioned Cronkite, right? That's a very different time. It's a different time not because of what we like or how things are. It is because the structure of journalism has changed. The ways that we communicate have changed. We have gone from a gatekeeper, let's say, model that we've seen in our research to an individual stream model, right? Social media have played a huge part in this, on how information is being disseminated, but also networked, and the place that a news consumer has in that information ecosystem. They're participant in this, they're sharers, right? So trust. I'm now going into more of the specifics, right? Trust has had the trust in news, whether that's journalists or the news media, has been declining for over 20 years. The news is not the only institution that has been suffering from that, just to put it out there. We are seeing declines from scientists, academia, trust in science, in academia, in research, in Congress, politicians. It's not a phenomenon that the news media, they're the only institution that they're experiencing. The interesting thing, and I'm going to get to Tony's remarks now, it has to do with young people. We don't know how young people are going to turn out in 10 years. So take it with a grain of salt. We're saying what is happening right now. It's true that younger people are trusting information from social media at the same level as trusting information from national news organizations. That is what we're seeing in our data. That is very different for older folks, right? They're still having higher levels of trust in, let's say, traditional media or national media. It's true that younger people are more open and they support the fact that they would like more advocacy from their journalists. Now, how that translates and how we can see that, it's a different, but that's a specific segment of the population, right? It's young people, that's 18 to 29. There is also a whole other segment of the population that they're very frustrated about bias. They don't like the political opinions in their news, but they cannot get out of it, which is kind of what I think it's kind of that messiness that you're describing, right? That on the one hand, people say, we don't want bias. I want objective media. I want just like simple, straight to the facts. But on the other hand, they are choosing sources they agree with. They are exposed to information that matches their political ideology, and that we are seeing in the data. So it is very complex. But let's say the insight that I would give, and I do that as a researcher most of the time, is that this is very new. Let's remember that, right? Things are shifting. We don't know how the dust is going to settle. We're seeing some trends, but even with social media, think about it. It's been like, 10 years that social media have kind of like taken a major place in our news consumption habits. That's kind of new, right? It's it's in infancy. If you think about how the news industry, right, has developed in the past 100 years, 200 years. So I would say, let's see how things will work out.
You mentioned the changing business model, which is a really great transition to Peter, because Peter, your career has been around the business side of media. And so I wanted to make sure we got that perspective in on the conversation. And I'd love to sort of hear what you've seen about where trust is in the business, but also talk about the difference between content that informs awareness and intelligence that informs decisions. There's a lot of free media out there that we all get. And then there's somewhat low-cost media that, we may subscribe to a great publication. But then there are intelligence media operations that people pay tens of thousands of dollars a year to get business information. And, Politico and others have those different levels of service. So talk to us a little bit about what you're seeing with trust, but then also how the business model of media is changing and where you see it going.
Sure. Thank you, Anthony. And so great here. Be the last one to get the first question and to hear all your perspectives. As we keep on repeating the term trust, one of the things that I think is sometimes missed there is that trust is also a big aspect of it is about utility. And one of the things that we're suffering within the media industry is not prioritizing the utility of the information, of the news that we're providing to our audience, because we're not, for a lot of legacy media institutions, not thinking it from the audience's perspective. That the citadel of truth that I believe in the fourth estate, has built an ivory tower that has kind of prevented us from going to the people and seeing it from their perspective. And that utility we see manifested as success stories within the B2B space, right? So helping people do their jobs has actually been the best laboratory and sandbox for media successes within the last 10, 20 years. Anthony's mentioned Politico. I've been an advisor to Semaphore, Punchbowl, for those that know Punchbowl, in this market, and a few others, and all of them have a discipline and have a reason to exist to see the world of helping leaders do their job, whether those leaders are on Capitol Hill, whether those leaders are going to Davos, in both cases Semaphore and with Punchbowl, and the precursors to that, whether it's Politico, Axios, are also take pride in doing less. They take pride in their journalists having specialization within domain expertise within certain areas that then build trust, but also build a very useful business model. Because the business model then is tied to, if you have that type of discipline around your audience, you're driving utility, then you are saying you're not for everyone, you're for a specific type of audience. By having specificity in that audience and not trying to just go for scale, what you have is then a translatable value proposition around your audience that can be great for sponsorships and advertising in a way that it's not about interruption, but it's around influence and shaping perceptions of brands. And that's what all the media companies that I've just mentioned have built. And we call that, my term on this is kind of it's a front porch strategy. A front porch strategy where it's free content and up at top, whether it's newsletters or events. What that front porch then allows over time is to build a business model of a premium backyard. That premium backyard is what we would consider kind of the pro service of any of these types of companies, where they're charging the way that Anthony's mentioned, tens of thousands of dollars. Now, what's the lesson learned there that this room or other media companies can provide? One is to get over the feeling that sometimes I talk to journalists, it's like, oh, I don't want to do a trade pub. I'm not a trade journalist. I don't want to do that. There's so many people that want to see my markup coverage on Capitol Hill outside of Washington. Peter, don't put a paywall around me. It's like, listen, buddy, there's nobody wants to see your markup coverage except for about 1,000 people, and they're paying us and they're keeping you employed. And so we have to get over some of that pride. And some of that exists in media within the J schools. There's a little too much emphasis of being the next Woodward and Bernstein. We all want to make sure that we set up journalists to change the course of history. That is absolutely important. At the same time, is trying to really emphasize doing more with less, and then having a direct relationship and understanding of who your audience is. Let me give you a story. Everyone know Mike Allen? Mike Allen, father of Playbook, father maybe of our newsletter industry here in town, and one of the co-founders of Axios. When we worked together at Politico, one of the great things that I learned from him was that when he woke up every day writing Playbook, he thought of writing to one person, and that was the chief of staff to the president. Not to the president, to the chief of staff to the president. And everything emanated from that. Regardless of who was the chief of staff or who was in power, that discipline of seeing the world through the lens of that one person made everything in Playbook extremely valuable. If you still read Playbook, its invention and its utility is not because of its aggregation at top and its curation. Those things are useful, but it's also been replicated. Its real value is in the second half of its of the newsletter. If you ever scroll down and see the birthdays in Playbook then do something which I'm sure Anthony and the group are going to bring up. It develops community, and that community is actually currency, because I still get, and I haven't been at Politico for about 5, 6, longer, more than 7 years. I still get texts about, hey, can you get my birthday in Playbook? And that actually shows the underlying motivations that people have that are important for both communicators in the audience, but also for journalists or in researchers. I think there's 2 variables that drive most human condition, which is paranoia and vanity. And if you see it from that perspective, then you understand the value of a birthday section. You see the value of being spotted because you want to be in the club. You want to be seen. You want to be, your needs are being met because you're helping them do your job, but you're also, their needs are being met because they are one step away from being the person in the room. And so I don't know if that answers your question, but that's my thought.
That's fantastic. And maybe this will be one of those spotted out and about in playbooks. Maybe we'll see it in there later. That would be nice. I want to pick up on what you said about community. One of the fun things I get to do is I host the Chief Influencer podcast in partnership with GW. And I interviewed Anna Palmer from Punchbowl, founder of Punchbowl. And one of the things she said was when they launched Punchbowl, they wanted to make sure they weren't just building an audience, that they were building a community. And so that's why they have events, a cornhole tournament, all kinds of different stuff. And I want to pick up on this community idea and how it connects to building trust locally through local news, because obviously our communities feel stronger through proximity. So Kat, can you share a little bit about the research and maybe some of the even contradictions in research when it comes to trust in local news?
Yes.
And then Tony and Jenny, I'd love for you to share your perspective being practitioners who have built trust as local news and content creators.
First of all, I think we have maybe the similar teachers, because I was told also when I was trained to write for someone that I know and who I think of when I'm writing. So it's a great advice. I write for my mom usually, who is interested. I'm not kidding. She's interested in the data, but I need to write it in a way so that she understands. So that's a great advice. Sorry, sidebar. Local news. Local news is a very interesting space for many reasons. One, I want to confirm the idea of community before I get to do specifically on trust. One of the things that we have seen in our local news work, which has been extensive, we've been studying local news, at least me being involved for more than 10, 15 years, is the fact that when people believe that their journalists and the media are in touch with the community, they're embedded in their communities, all the levels of assessments for the media, how they're doing their job, jump up. Like, you are more likely to have trust, to evaluate positively your journalist and your local media if you believe that they're embedded in community. So that type of connection is really important. People really value that. So when you're looking at trust, local news enjoys actually pretty high levels of trust compared to national news and your more traditional or bigger legacy media. And not only they're enjoying higher levels of trust, but also majorities of Americans believe that it's important for their well-being of their communities and their society, their town. They also believe that the differences that we see, I'm just going to pick that, but the differences that we see in polarization in national media, they don't exist yet in local news. So that's a big finding that we have, because I'm sure you all have heard about Republicans and Democrats. They trust different media. They go to different sources. There is so much polarization in our society. Well, for local news, we don't see that so much. We are seeing both sides of the spectrum trusting the information they're getting from local news. So there's a lot of space there for people to see the utility, the importance, the contributions that local media can offer to their to themselves and their society and neighborhoods and town.
So I would say community has been a huge thing for me when I think about how how I'm trying to do social media differently and develop trust in that space. One of the things that I started to do recently, and I actually got this idea because I was thinking about Peter's speech. I watched the speech that he did and at the press club and the birthday thing. And so one of the things I started to do was add, just like, this is not the same, but on a local level, I thought about my audience and what they need. And so one of the things that I add to my videos at the end and in my captions sometimes are events that are coming up. So not like events, like more like data center bills that you can come and discuss, like if you want to talk about this data center bill and go to the county council, they're having a hearing at this date. Or if you want to register for local elections, the due date, it passes on this date. Or if you want to talk about the budget, this is coming up at this time. I put this at the end as something that I feel, you don't have to go and click and find and look for where something is coming. And I think about the audience that follows me. A lot of the people are engaged citizens. We are public media, so we're looking at a different kind of audience. But I do think about it. I always reject the notion that people are not interested. I do think there is a lot of overload. And so that's why I keep my videos at 90 seconds. I am going to synthesize the entire budget for you 90 seconds, and I will sit there and try to do it the best I can so that you understand what happened and how it got to what it did. And I had a council member literally come up to me and she was like, I have been trying to explain this to people for weeks. And she's like, I was so thankful for your video because I felt like, wow, that's it. And it's just 90 seconds. So, and my thought process is, yeah, I don't want to overload the audience. I don't want to use big words. I don't want to make it hard for you to understand the system that you live in. And the local system is complex. And I feel like sometimes we do have a better understanding of the national system than we even do of the local one. And so part of my thought process is to sometimes I do a lot of very basic 101 stuff. I'm like, this is the county executive. By the way, he doesn't actually control the zoning in the area. So if you want to complain about the zoning, you need to go talk to this guy who's on the council. And these are things that normally we assume people know, but people don't. And being able to kind of say, okay, this is the system that you live in, and this is also the story, I think is a value add for people. And I've had people come up to me and they say, I'm so glad that, she's like, somebody told me that they were like, oh, I trust you so much. I don't trust that mainstream media. But there is a sense that, they feel that they know you as a person, and that is a difference. And but I always also say, okay, I'm from this station for people who know that. But some people don't even know that, and they don't even pay attention to it. They just know that they trust you, and so that is a big deal. I do think about it as a community online that I have.
That's great. I don't trust the mainstream media, but I trust you. And you're like, I am the mainstream media. And I just want to reflect something that you just described about the value you're adding through those short clips. And it aligns with what Peter said about it's the utility. What's the utility of the information? And you've made it really actionable. And you can do that in short form in ways that you might not be able to do in a segment that you're recording. So they complement. It's not just chopping it down, it's complementing it.
I will say, yeah, definitely. What I do on air is so different. It's clean, it's polished. It's like, I try not to say, you don't say, if you say, I'm going to cut it out. We don't even have time for that. Airtime is so tight. And so, it's just everything has a very specific way of it being done. And so I do feel like on social media, I have a little bit more latitude to be myself and to talk a little fast and maybe slur my word a little bit more than I would and than I would on air. And I think that's okay because that space allows for those things, and it does allow me to say, okay, I'm going to add this thing because I know that the people who follow me specifically look for these type of things. They're usually union heads or something else, and they're very involved and they want to know what's happening next. And so having an awareness of who I am, I guess making videos for, not necessarily writing for in that space, is something that I try to do as I give them something that's I hope is useful. Because I'm taking your 90 seconds. You're gonna be so glad you just stayed here for this 90 seconds.
What do you see about this, Tony? Especially because I know you walk down the street and you get recognized all the time. And sometimes it might be because they saw you on Fox 5, but more often it's probably because they saw you on TikTok or Instagram.
It's funny. The biggest honor is when people say, I watch you on Fox 5. It's like, I was at the MGM casino. I like to go there now and again. And there's a group of people came up to me and they're older and they go, Tony, I go, how do you know me? Because you're in your 60s. And they watch me on the TV. That was just the coolest thing. So I love that. But I think when it comes to local media and as a consumer of it for a lot of my life and now being a part of it, what we're seeing at Fox and a lot of networks is that we're getting into the streaming business where not only are we now having the 6 o'clock news, the 8 o'clock news, networks like mine are doing pop culture shows. They're doing hot take shows. They're doing 2-hour news programs that look like a podcast. My show's a 1-hour news program. It's myself and my co-host. And we go through the news like a podcast format. We're sometimes dressed like this. We dress down a little bit now and again. We have pop culture mixed in there. We do rundown type of news. We do longer stories. We do interviews. And what's interesting is we covered some issues in Montgomery County, I think it was about 6 to 8 months ago, about a major vote for teachers. And we had parents interviewed. We had parent councils as part of this. We brought in the community on Zoom. They gave their opinions. So we kind of spread it out. We told you what was going on, and then we showed you what the impact was looking like. Because utility is very important. I love this discussion on utility because it's so important to have a news that can teach you or inform you to help you in your career or to get better in your life. I think also, does the news relate to your struggles? Those kitchen table issues, whether it be economics or I can't afford a certain item for school, or this vote's going to impact my water quality, whether it be the Potomac River issues recently. What does that mean for a person raising a family? For water quality, do I have to prepare for bottled water? Things of that nature. If you can explain it to them in a way that says, hey, this is how it relates to your life. This is how, if you don't listen to this, you're going to miss out on X. And that's a big way to do it because people are going all the time. We're consumed with content that if they can find a nugget to help them figure out this is what it means for me, they'll keep coming back. And I think those imperfections, we talk about the ums and the delivery of news, those imperfections actually help with trust because it doesn't sound so polished. I think, and I've recognized this in my own content, even though I kind of have a broadcaster voice, a lot of my followers hate when I narrate that way. They want me to talk more like a Bostonian. When I first thought about news, I thought I had to drop my Boston accent. When I went to Fox, they had no problem with it. They had no problem me having kind of that Northeast accent because it was relatable. And I still grapple with that because I still have that old school in me. I want to be the polished person. But that doesn't really matter anymore. And I'll finally say this. Local stories from an investigative perspective are going viral at a crazy rate. I see a good friend of mine at Fox, Shamari Stone, who's a major, big-time reporter, national level and regional level. And he'll do stories about, he's excellent. He's a fantastic reporter. He's a great presenter. But he'll do stories about, a shooting and he'll be on site. And that clip will just be a widescreen and he'll talk about it so well, that will go viral because the topic matters. It's about safety. It's about community. It impacts people directly. And then Shamar will do stories from his car and he'll talk about the impact. I spoke to a mother. I spoke to a teacher about this. And he'll talk about the story for a minute, 2 minutes, and it will get 8 to 10,000 likes because he talks about the human impact of it. So I think that matters. And the biggest thing for us from my show, when you bring in the audience, when you let them talk about things, whether it's a hot take show, like we have a panel, or you do a news program, you have different community sources coming in and folks that are, just regular community members can comment, they can talk with those leaders, that goes viral instantly as well.
This episode is brought to you by the George Washington University's College of Professional Studies. With in-person and online programs ranging from master's degrees in public relations strategy to certificate programs in digital communications, GW offers more than just the credentials to help working professionals get ahead. It prepares them to be leaders in their field. Check out cps.gwu.edu for more information. I want to just pick up on one thing you said about authenticity that I'd never heard that really kind of connected with me. And I think it's something we could bring back to our organizations, our bosses. But like the authenticity, we know social media authenticity, right? Like it's okay to have the ums. But you just said that a TV station told you, hey, you don't have to downplay your Bostonian accent. You can just be yourself. Yeah. That's authentic. I worked at a TV station for a summer in college many years ago, and TV stations, you could watch it in Kansas City, where I'm from, New York, San Francisco. News anchors all adopted this sort of standard Midwest accent. And now you're saying even the traditional media are saying, actually, it's okay if we don't do that. I mean, and that might be something to bring back to our organizations when our bosses want this really polished video or they want everything to be in a certain format. Even TV stations are sort of changing that. And that's such a good example.
Oh, the thing is it's also about enjoyability of the video, right? So I'll watch something for 5-6 minutes on Instagram from a Morning Brew or from Politico or from Axios, but it's tight. They get to the point quickly. They have really good graphics that are behind it. They might do some voiceover work and direct to camera. They mix it up in terms of format. They're not just one face to camera the entire time. We're seeing graphics behind when they explain something, for example. A link goes there. And maybe you have your kind of your accent, your Boston accents in there as well. You have that expression, the passion as well. It's not restrained. Having this kind of, open passion and really just good delivery, that works as well. And I think authenticity also is about the delivery of the video. Do I feel soothed while I'm watching this news story be given to me, whether it's Axios or Politico. When I'm reading it, it's quick to the point. It's bullet points. It's insights. What's going on behind the scenes when this decision was made by the president in the Oval Office? This is what happened. This is what this community member thought about it. And it's all in bullets. That works for so many people. That's one thing I'm working on, is to be kind of a tighter speaker where I just get to the point a lot faster. I'm Italian. I go off on rants. Okay, I have Sunday dinner
I
conversations.
can relate.
That works to a certain extent. In long form videos and YouTube, I can go off forever. But when it comes to the shorter form, people like it to be kind of just, it weaves. It's soothing, but it's also quick.
Because I do think that but this will touch on both authenticity and the objectivity conversation, just because I don't think that you have to be non-objective to be authentic. And I say that I try, like, for example, I did a story while I did a 90-second video. I was about to make dinner. I was literally standing over my pot, and my kid was on my leg. And I was like, you know what? I want to do this video real quick because it's in my head and I need to get it out. And I tell the audience, hey, I'm cooking dinner. This is what's happening. But before I get started and finish this, or before this burns, I want to make this video real quick and tell you about this ICE detention center in Hyattsville. That video went absolutely viral. But it's not necessarily that I'm giving you my opinions on that thing. It's more that I'm like, hey, I'm this mom that's struggling to make dinner, and I'm going to try and do this real quick. It's not going to be perfect or polished, but I got to give you this information, and I think it's important for you to have it. And so here's the information. Now I'm going to go back and finish my dinner. And so, and I will do those videos in the kitchen. I'll do it in the car. Sometimes my kids will interrupt my live streams. Like, and that's my real life. That is my real life, where I'm like trying to balance a lot of things, and sometimes a little bit less gracefully. And I'm very honest about that. And I'm also honest about the fact that sometimes I'm experimenting with styles that I don't even think or know will work, but I'm just going to try this. And I'm very honest that I'm like, okay, guys, this might look weird, or this graphic might suck, but I'm going to be like, let's try it. Let's see if it works. If you guys like it, tell me. If you don't, you can comment on it or whatever. And I think people are very receptive to that. I do think that objectivity, at least in where I am, still does matter. I recently had a situation where there was a debate, and literally they told me that they wanted me to moderate the debate because none of the candidates trusted the other people. And so they were fighting with each other about who they wanted to moderate the debate, and the only person they could agree on was me. And that was because they felt like I was fair. And I do think that that matters, because not just for the candidates who are, you're moderating a debate from, but also for the audience. And so I think that, when I hear things like that, it reminds me that whether people say they want objectivity or not, at the end of the day, there are certain things in our society that requires that. And they need somebody that they feel will be fair to them.
I think that what I'm hearing is that there are different flavors of authenticity.
Yeah.
It may be objective. For some people, it might be sharing an opinion. For some people, it might be keeping the accent. For some people, it might be giving a little slice into their life. So, that's, I think, a really good takeaway. I want to switch gears to an AI question, and I want to open it up to you all. So think of your questions. But before I move gears to that, Peter, I just want to see if you had anything to add on this thread.
I have a couple things. One is that as we think about when Tony mentioned sort of his call-in show, I want to say a couple things about that. That one is that as everyone knows, Jenny is at WAMU, and I see our Chief Content Officer at WAMU, Michael Tribble here. For full disclosure, I'm the chair of the board of advisors at WAMU. Anthony is also a member of the board. And why I mention that is because one of the great things at WAMU is the Politics Hour. And the Politics Hour with Kojo is one of the classic call-in shows that allow people to surface the questions that they want to surface, and Kojo is one of the all-time Hall of Famer hosts. What's been amazing to see a sandbox to allow someone like Jenny within that institution is to experiment still outside. It used to be the case that I've been in other newsrooms where, and I would be the guy if I was the publisher, is like, hey, don't go on social media, don't go do any of that. But it's understanding the talent that someone like Jenny is to bring that authenticity of not just being a reporter on the beat of Maryland, but also a citizen of that community, and allowing that to manifest on stage, but also in the community in a way where that's going to be the value of these institutions that I think will exist and remain something like a WAMU, that the intimacy of the ear is also related to the value of connectivity that the talent has to their audience. And that talent on the audience, another piece that I want to say about the whole idea of participation. Anthony mentioned a company that I'm an advisor of called Two-Way. If you go to two-way.tv, Two-Way has only been around a couple of years, and it's creating a whole set of YouTube streaming shows that focus on, some of it's on politics, but what's really different about it, it has some pundit type guests, but it has a live audience, a live Zoom audience. And what's amazing to see is that there are these civic super fans across our country, as I call them, who are, got their home studio because the cost of having uplighting and an HD camera is not that much. And then people want to be on camera. They want to be seen, because for 100 years, we've had a media industry that's about monologues. People want dialogues. Even in social media, we've been just getting shorter monologues, right? So how do we really encourage this kind of participatory media is really important. The second thing about that, and the stuff that I'm really developing with Two-Way, is that there's got to be fresh ways that we understand people's identity. If you think of like the newspaper sections that we've had, they're so basic. I mean, like sports, right? Entertainment, that we're much more complicated than that. So one of the areas that I'm developing some shows around is like, what are those life moments that people are universally experiencing, but we also end up doing them alone, like caregiving? Like, what would be a call-in show around caregiving that can meet people where they are in their journey, that raises kind of a new type of tribe of people who are not left and right, but are kind of shared pain? And fertility IVF treatments is another one. The journey around family planning right now is really something that people often do alone. And I say that because there's an opportunity, I think, really on local media to what Jenny is doing, what WAMU is doing, what Tony's doing with his show, is building out civic infrastructure. But that civic infrastructure can't be talking at the people, but trying to meet them where they are.
Thank you, Peter. That's fantastic. And Two-Way, I think, is just such a great example of sort of the new model of new media, right? Bringing that participatory discussion together. Kara, would you mind coming up and getting the mic from Peter? And we'd love to just open it up to questions from you all. I have a bunch more, but I don't want to be too self-indulgent. We have one right up here in the front row from Andreas, our friend and chair and board member of National Digital Roundtable. Thanks for being
Yes,
here.
thank you. I'm Andreas from the Italian Embassy. Just a quick question about sort of like long form versus smart brevity. You mentioned Mike Allen. He invented obviously the playbook, but also smart brevity at Axios, and content creators that often go to TikTok in very, very short form. How do you grapple with all this different formats? Sometimes we have content creators on TikTok that are struggling with YouTube. Sometimes we have YouTubers that are struggling with long form, especially when it's written, like Substack. How do you see that space, especially when it comes to Washington, D.C. and politics?
I do think, first of all, for me, it's bandwidth. And so the reality of the situation is it is easier for me to do a 90-second video about something than for me to sit down and do some long form content. And so that is the first restraint that I think it comes into play, at least in terms of, I'm also doing stuff for air. So, right now the demands of trying to repurpose information is high, because I have my story that's digital, right? That's written. Then I have my story that's on air. And then I have a story that's on TikTok and Instagram. The only thing that's repeating is the TikTok and Instagram one, because I use those exact same, but the scripts for them are different from the scripts for the digital story, and it's different from the scripts for air on air, just because the way you talk is so different. And so that's like 3 different ways of having to write the same script for information. And then if you think about if you do for long form, there's a heavy lift there too. So I do have Substack, but I'm not as consistent on that platform like I would like to be. And that's literally a bandwidth thing. And so I do think that is something that people are asking for. Like, people want to go in. There is a cadre of your, 1,000 most, diehard people who will be really interested in every single format that you put out and will want to get some of that long form stuff. And I think that's kind of like what Peter was talking about with the, backdoor the back, what is it, back porch?
Front porch.
Front porch, back door, like, so I think that's, I would say like that would be that would be a valuable next step after you build up like the short form clips. How do you get those people who really love it to come and do something long form or come and watch something longer form? And that would be the people I think that would be easiest for the station to like monetize in some kind of way. But this is my personal theory about that.
I just want to just mention here that I think I'll give a view on this from both the short term and long term. In the short term, it's a real struggle in the sense of I have a startup called Up Next. If you go to upnext.news, that my theory of the case was I'm going to create Instagram for news, but not on Instagram, and that we're going to create our own private feed. And so if you go to it, it's a homage to Instagram, and we're going to cover in 9x16s really complex things that will help leaders go faster. The challenge that I have found is that I don't have a newsroom of people who know how to create that type of content. Now, the opportunity, and this is where I think that I'm in the long run, I think I'm going to be right about starting with the format, the social post, as being the first format that then allows you to do other types of formats that with AI, which you didn't get to ask your question on AI, but on AI, that it's not artificial intelligence, is accelerated intelligence, that it's going to, it helps our newsroom and content creators accelerate in terms of whatever that insight they actually have, how we create multiple formats at once. And of course, there's still humans in the loop that we got to make sure that happens, that verifies. But that I am finding that the latest models are allowing me to achieve the creativity and nostalgia and all the emotions that Tony is talking about, that the atomic unit of a social post allows us to have both a time machine as well as something that brings us joy and reflection in a way that I don't think traditional media can fully appreciate. But we have a talent gap. We have a talent gap that's not going to be closed anytime soon. J schools aren't teaching reporters how to break stories and tell investigative pieces in a slideshow. And I think that until we catch up to that, what the use of AI is that, well, how do we help people like Jenny not feel that it's something that only she has to do, to be able to take something that it's an original reporting that is, again, done from a broadcast excellence perspective, but how do we help her translate that in ways that allows her to do increase her capacity and output?
Thank you. Hi, my name is Maddie, and I handle digital communications for the European Union's delegation here. And I've been hearing a lot of talk about TikTok and Instagram, but not a lot about the other platforms. And so I'm wondering, why Instagram? Why are we focusing on Instagram? And are any of these lessons transferable to the other platforms, or should maybe instead we keep focusing on Instagram? Thank you.
Kat, maybe you can just start about the research if Instagram is where we should be focused.
Yes, I think the reason why there is so much emphasis on Instagram and TikTok is because they're the most growing platforms that we've seen for news consumption. So since we're talking about news, this is where a lot of the growth has been happening, and a lot of the young audiences, right, kind of like picking up news on those platforms. That doesn't mean that other platforms like Facebook, for instance, they're not big. Like Facebook is already so big, right? It's a more of a, let's call it traditional, is that okay? Platform than the others, and there's a lot of people on it, right? I think you touched on something very important that we see on the research, which is not all social media are the same, right? When we talk about social media, I know we throw this term around a lot. It doesn't mean that one strategy or the audiences that we see in one place are transferable, or they like the same things that they like in another platform, or they go to other platforms for the same reasons, right? And we've seen that. We actually have done a lot of work where people choose to go to TikTok for very different reasons that they go to Facebook. The sources that they're following or they're consuming news are very different. So, for example, I'm sure you're not surprised when people go to X, they were expecting more journalists. That's the people that they're following. They're more intentional. It's more intentional and seeking news. While, for example, on the TikTok and Instagram, it's more of your creators or celebrities, and it's more of an accidental exposure. So just to give you a bit of like, I agree that it's not one fits all, right, on all of that.
Tony, you have the biggest following, I believe, personally, of anyone up here. So what's your take on this?
I mean, for me, it's about reaching people, not about numbers. I'll tell you that much. But I'll say this: we're living in the clip economy now. A good friend of mine, Ed Elson, that works with Professor Scott Galloway, they kind of coined this phrase: we're the clip economy. I look at content now just based on that. That's why people, I think, are going to Instagram and TikTok to do content, because we know that most people are not going to watch a full length show. I mean, TBPN, which is a business podcast, just got bought by OpenAI for what, a couple $100 million? Their clips generated millions of views. You know how many views their long form shows got? Only a few thousand, and they still got bought for $200 million. So I think Instagram, TikTok, that is the entry point. You look at shows like Subway Takes, you look at shows like Track Star, these kind of lifestyle shows. They all started with clips, and then they started going to long form uncut shows. The trust that, if you could call it a gatekeeper, the gatekeeping is through the short form. And then they trust you enough to hand you the rest of their attention, because our attention spans are a depleting asset. And if an audience is willing to give you that, it means your show is good. And you have to master that short form article first so they can give you that trust to watch the entire show.
That's great. Didn't realize some of those started with clips. So
Oh,
clip
it's
economy.
crazy. I mean, $200 million for clips, basically. It's nuts.
Wow, we're in the wrong business.
Good morning. My name is Raquel Rie. I work with a nonpartisan free speech foundation called Freedom Forum. Thank you all for being here today. I wanted to shout out the politics hour that Jenny did. I love the way that WAMU hosts are able to engage with each other, and I think it just adds to the community nature of my favorite station. But my question has to do with shadow banning. Have you all experienced shadow banning, and what has been your experience navigating social media with shadow banning?
So I checked my there's a way that you can go back and check if you have any like complaints or something like that. I haven't had any, and I haven't had that experience. And so I've had videos that I'm like, okay, why did this not do as well? I don't know the answers to some of those things. And so sometimes it's like, sometimes they do well. Sometimes I think this is going to be a random video. I don't even need to do this. And it just goes bonkers. And so that, I studied the algorithm a lot to try and understand it, but it's constantly changing. And even you'll see like the head of Instagram constantly being on there and on different platforms and saying, okay, we're adding this or we're changing this. And every time they change that, something weird happens, or something might have done well might not do as well. And so I do have a formula that I did write. I took a whole day and wrote out like how some people, I looked at all the people who were doing well, and I looked at how their structures of their videos were, and I tried to see how I could in some ways fit some of those structures. And so, or borrow from some of their templates, I would say, as to how they did successful journalism on social media. And I'm always doing that, though. That's something that I do all the time. So like sometimes they're like, oh, Jenny, you're scrolling. I'm like, no, I am studying. Thank you very much.
That's right. That's right. Oh, listen, I use that a lot. And I mean, for me, again, the shadow ban thing is sometimes for me an excuse to say that my content wasn't as awful as it probably was. But that's just kind of, I'll say I was shadow banned. No, my content was just bad that day. But I think with the changing algorithms, the biggest change that we've seen from when I started in early 2023 is that the storytelling reward system has changed. The 3-second hook now is so much more important than it was when I first started. You got to hook them in those first 3 seconds, because it's all about how long does that viewer stay on the video. And they have these graphs that are accompanied with the Edits app or with the Instagram app generally. You can see the fall off rate. And if you can keep that fall off rate at about 50%, you're going to be okay. But a lot of videos, if you can't hook them in those first 3 seconds, your video is done for. There are so many creators, comedians, news people that have millions of followers that now only get a fraction of those views. So the follower count doesn't even matter anymore. It's all about that structured storytelling. How do you get them in the first 3 seconds? That hook can be something of a physical thing. You kind of swoop in, or it can be a camera angle. It can be a few words, whatever it looks like. It's all about the hooks now. So how do you get them into those first 3 seconds? So, I mean, shadow banning, of course, is very much, I see it as a thing, especially among political creators or advocacy creators. When issues are talked about, you do see some banning. I mean, I've seen it from friends of mine in the industry. But for lifestyle creators, even like some kind of, I would say, journalistic adjacent, like mine, that it's about the hook. It's really about the structure that kind of gets you to be kind of quote unquote shadow banned by the algorithms. That if you're not meeting that rate, it's not going to work for you.
And I do think it's important to also not be on one platform only.
Yes.
So like if you're, that's why I repost my videos on YouTube. I don't have any followers, but I put it there anyway. And but I do like TikTok and Instagram and Threads, and those are my main. And because I can't do everything because that just takes up too much time. But there's some that I can focus on, and I cannot rely on the platform because that is not safe. As someone who does journalism and somebody who creates, I just don't think that's a great idea to just be on one thing.
We have one more question in the back here, Kara, whoever you pick, and then I'm going to ask the last one before we wrap up because I want you to have a chance to come up and talk to these folks and maybe take some selfies before you leave. So,
Hi, my name is Janvi Bojwani. I was an open source intelligence reporter at NBC for 7 years, and now I'm doing a couple of different independent projects. And thank you all so much for sharing all your insights and knowledge with all of us today. My question specifically dives into AI, and the CEO of French media outlet Le Monde recently said that after they striked a deal with OpenAI, that it generated 70 times more like generations onto their website than Facebook, and 173 times than Google. So how does that shift like the future of news in terms of like what is going to be shown on the AI algorithm systems, and how does that drive news into the platforms?
how are you thinking about AI in terms of reaching people, but also I think in terms of leveraging it as a tool in general? Yeah.
That's a great question. Of course, I have a hot take on AI. I've said this in a few places now, and I'm writing a lot about it, which I think also applies to public affairs. That AI unintended is going to eliminate the middle class of media. And I also think it means that it's going to eliminate the middle class of public affairs as well. And we've seen this before. We've seen this with any type of disruptive technology where there's been some form of unbundling. What that means is that's kind of more of a barbell. So you're going to see people at the top, sort of in media, a handful of institutions, the ones that we probably could all list at the top of our head, top of our mind, and they're going to continue to dominate. We're going to see a lot more consolidation, acquisitions, media ownership is going to be concentrated up there. What also is going to be the case is that you're going to see a lot more new entrants, right? So the barrier to entry to come in and to be both a creator, a journalist, or I have 3 startups right now that 2 years ago I would have had probably 5 employees in each one. Now I've got 2 full-time people that support all 3. Because I'm able to do it from a backpack perspective on both Claude and Cowork and Claude Code, and it's extraordinary because I don't have to manage people, which is really great. But what that does is that a lot of those new entrants are going to have to try to find a business model, or that it's the investment community that the VCs and angels are going to allow to want to see those new entrants. What gets eliminated are going to be the people that on the media side that focus on scale, that focuses on traffic, that focuses on things that are highly commoditized, reposting like on the local news side. I don't know how many people still have PR Newswire. It's one of the things I say all the time. If you got PR Newswire, get rid of it. Because the blast that goes into a newsroom that are these press releases that then you go back and say to your clients, like, oh, look, we've got all these hits. When in reality, there's wire services that go and post those on the affiliate station of some local news channel that then are just adding it for page views, and that content and the monetization against it is just going to go away. And so what there needs to be an intervention, though, because we all want a middle class, we want sort of a more thriving and whole industry. What's going to have to happen is that we're going to have to find ourselves to, one, reimagine how we think about the hierarchy of media in terms of even how we talk about local and national. I think that's the geographic paradigm there has to be rethought about the identity of people. That's a big concept, but I think there's more nuances where we can start creating different forms of communities, clubhouses, and still have good journalism and have good convening and have participation, but it has to be on a micro level. And that, if we can invest more there, then that middle class might show up. In terms of traffic, I want to say this, that just like Google was a big threat to news sites in terms of search, AI is a big threat to Google, which then means that it trickles down into those news local news. And when I say local news, I don't mean like the independent ones. I'm talking about sort of the ones that are still owned by Gannett and the ones that are sort of metropolitan sort of papers that have emphasized sort of algorithms around search are in big trouble. And whether or not they can break through into making sure that being discovered by the latest GPTs that are out there is a tech gap that I'm not sure if they're in position to meet that challenge, both from a talent and an investment.
Yeah, very quickly, I would say, I mean, we have data on the impact of AI summaries on traffic. I mean, now it's like 7 months old, which is old, I guess, in today's world. But I think that immediate impact, where a lot of these conversations were happening, it was there. The interesting thing, if you flip the relationship, right, thinking about the consumer, what we are saying is that there is an increase of awareness. So, but it's still on the smaller side, especially when it comes to news consumption. So we are very early on that front of like people actually using chatbots or AI summaries as their main way of getting their news. But what we are seeing, which is I think is super interesting, is the fact that those that they're actually getting, they think that this is very helpful. It is actually a very easy way of consuming news, even though they don't trust it yet. So there is low trust there. So there is skepticism, but it's this kind of like, I'm going back to the negotiating relationship that we're having, right? That they see the utility, the usefulness, the importance. But on the other hand, is like, do I trust this? How do I navigate it? Do I have the knowledge to tackle this that is in front of me?
Yeah, I mean, we were discussing this yesterday because we were thinking about me and one of my colleagues. There was a really interesting Neiman article, and it was talking about how you get subscribers to pay, and it talked about the difference between like it's not there's a type of content where you're trying to get page views, and those advertising dollars, that's usually an advertising model, right? Because you're trying to get the advertisers to pay based on how many people click on your page, and that has not worked for a lot of newsrooms to focus on that just. And so a lot of people have put up the paywalls because they want to get subscribers, etc. But the article kind of talked about how you get subscribers, and they talked about that being that people are willing to pay for that hard news, which is interesting because we always think, they click more on the entertainment, but they'll open their wallets and subscribe because of the investigation. And that is something to kind of just keep in mind as as what kind of model you're building, and what kind of content you're creating per se, and what people are willing to pay for in their, what makes them open their wallet and say, I will subscribe to this news organization. So I think that is fascinating. I also think, I'm the type of journalist that I kind of feel like I see things and I'm like, okay, I don't look at AI as something that's scary to me. I don't think AI can replace my job. It would be very, very hard to go and talk to people off the record when you're AI. And so like there are some things that are just required with human connection, and there's certain interpretations that really do require a human. I was sitting yesterday going through candidates, and I at one point was like, hey, I'm interpreting what this candidate said this way. Is that a fair interpretation? And I asked my colleagues that because I want to make sure, I want to check myself, because people really take these things seriously, and whatever you write, the adjectives you use, all of those things really matter, and having at least two heads to go through it. And like, you're not just listening to what they say, it's how they say it, it's the pauses, it's the laughs. All those things are like things that AI cannot not do as well as I can. And so a lot of what I focus on is just, I also do news, but I'm not like a paper of record, right? I do a lot of analysis with my stuff, and a lot of couching it within the system that we're living in, and I think that adds longevity to it. And I've started to create some things. Like I said, let me try and make an AI agent to scrape the websites I check every day and send me a read every morning, so that it makes me a little bit easier. Now, I don't know if it gets everything. So sometimes I go back and check myself just to make sure it's got the headlines for me. But I do use it to say, okay, go Claude and check these are the places I check every morning. Can you check them for me every morning and then give me a list? So it makes my job a little bit faster. And so that's true.
And you just reflected what Kat said. People want to use it, but they don't necessarily trust it. So you're using it, but you don't necessarily trust
Very
it.
true.
Yeah, I mean, AI, I think, is going to allow for solo operations like myself to be a lot more efficient. I edit everything I do, and I post one or two times a day, and it's a lot of effort. I think AI can be, again, that accelerant where it can help me make more content, and that can actually help me be more creative. I'll be honest, I'm sort of an AI skeptic. I am a part of the AI guy. I love watching AI Network. I go to a lot of the events. I love it. But I'm still kind of a skeptic, and I have a little bit of, is it going to take a lot of jobs for especially my generation? But I think in the long run, the more practical impact's going to be building out a back office, being able to do the editing, being able to maybe focus more on the creative and then translate it and have it actually operationally work through an AI model or through AI editing, because that'd be a heck of a lot easier. And just to have, have an editor work with it or have that thing do the clips for me.
I think what I've heard from each of you on this is that AI for this kind of backroom type operation can be really valuable, but it can't build sources and it can't understand community and it can't build trust in that way. I want to ask one final question, and then we can start with you, Peter, and come down. I'll just tell a very quick anecdote. So my husband and I just got a new puppy. It's like the cutest little, looks like an AI generated puppy, 5 pounds. And in fact, we had been talking about it for a long time. We sent a picture to a friend and he said, "You didn't get a puppy. That's an AI pic." And then we sent a picture of us holding the puppy and he sent it back with us holding a particular politician saying, "See, could be AI generated." And I had to go like FaceTime live with it, to show him that this was real. And I meant, man, if my friend doesn't even trust that I got a puppy, we are in trouble when it comes to trust in this world of AI, because everything that can be created just looks so good. So I'm going to ask you a very hard question, ask everybody to answer it maybe in a sentence so that we can wrap up here, which is, what's one thing all of us can do over the next year to build trust in this new media era? What should we be focused on, knowing that trust is at such a premium right now? Peter, you have the hard job of going first, but just one thing for everybody to take away, and then I want to give you all time to chat and take your selfies before we leave.
I will answer that, but I want to also recommend, if you want to be both frightened but also see where the puck is going on AI, read the CEO of Anthropic, Dario, has a piece called Machines of Loving Grace. Everyone should read it. And then if you really want to geek out, read the Pope's encyclical on AI. We are about to go into a war that I think is about what is the role of humans in our society. And it sounds like science fiction. It'll really sound like science fiction when you read Dario's piece, but it's really important to think about the social hierarchy, the current both caste system that we might have as a society, that AI, to those that are creating it, are actively thinking about a future, not a nation state, but agent state. Okay. So in terms of, I know, you like that? All right. So in terms of the one thing is that where it has been the case for so long that media has been the convener, and that media would be on stage like this, and I've done a lot of this where I'm interviewing somebody. The flip of it is that the ones that are being convened can be the convener. That the best thing that is happening right now, because of the barrier to entry and the cost of technology, is that anyone can be a podcast and anyone be a creator. The problem is anyone do a podcast and everyone can be a creator, and there's too much of it. So the question to change the paradigm is that within your organizations is have an authentic conversation about who has real opportunity to build trust with your audience. It may not be the CEO. The CEO may not, you may not want to put them in a reel eating an Arch Deluxe. And for the first time, if you know what I'm talking about, and don't chase the shiny object. The hard thing is about that restraint, and then trying to find who are the people that we want to put out there. Because I do believe this, that news, just mass news, is noise. Experts are signals.
I would say, especially as I'm thinking my research and all of the things we've done, we, even in research, and I'll take the blame a bit on this, we focus a lot on the disagreements that people have, right? There's a lot of findings and work that even myself is doing that there's a lot of agreement as well. So personal connection that we talked about, community, I know we throw these words, but they are important. We are seeing it in our data that those matter. They do matter, and they do actually increase trust, not only to journalists and the media or creators, but also interpersonal trust, which is one item that we didn't talk about it so much because it's not about the news specifically, but that's another decline that we're seeing. And if you're thinking about exactly your example, right? I'm wondering, why does your friend doesn't trust you? You, right? And it's that interpersonal trust that comes with human connection. So that's I don't offer advice usually, but thinking about the data, that's the one bright spot, let's say, that I'm seeing.
It's funny, the McDonald's thing that happened. With a lot of my corporate clients, I use that as a horror story for them not to do this. I think when it comes to whether it be the clients that I work with or on-air stuff, it's okay to be transparent. I think to gain trust, you have to be transparent. We're seeing former President Biden's son, Hunter Biden, go viral on social media, and he's talking about his vulnerabilities. And yeah, he's had his funny clapbacks, things of that nature. But we also see Wendy's. We see Ryanair clap back at customers. We see personality out there. So if you want to have trust, you got to be transparent about your faults. Don't be afraid of being exposed for something, because you know what? Sometimes, and most times, audiences are they're pretty forgiving. And I just think embracing that vulnerability, it's okay to have those moments. Don't have canned moments where you make mini bites on air and then you could lose trust. Embrace some faults, have some personality, have a little attitude, but also own your faults when you make them. And I think if you do that, you can gain that trust. And hopefully we can get people attention spans back, because I think trust will eventually equal better attention spans because we need them.
And real quick, Jenny, before you go, Tony, you mentioned embrace vulnerability. And I noticed at least twice during this discussion, you talking about areas that you want to improve, that you feel like that you aren't there. And I just think, like, I thought, oh, like, that's a really humble thing to do. So you modeled the advice today.
I am a cacophony of faults and about a bunch of enigmas wrapped into one, and just trying to figure out how to live in this world.
So I think when I first got on TikTok, I didn't want to, but I was looking at Pew Research data, and I mean, I was like, oh my God, they're getting their news here. Okay. And I decided to get on TikTok, and somebody made a joke and they said, are you going to dance? And I was like, no, I'm going to do the news. And I think that we can, just because it's brief and just because it's social media doesn't mean it can't have depth. And I think that that has to go together. We should not make assumptions about what audiences want and what they don't want. There is an audience for what you are doing if you're doing it well. And I have found, at least in the, now it's about 10 months. Now it's like, I have about maybe 14,000 followers on TikTok. It's not a million, but it's a short time period where we've seen growth and it's consistent. And people always come up to me and say, thank you for what you're doing on this platform, because they get a lot of noise and they're so happy that they found something that they felt uses their time well. And so I do think that, we look at stuff and we're like, oh, there's noise there, we shouldn't go there. But I think that you can be the antidote if you want to, or you can be part of the problem. So
Practical thing to do that I'll challenge everyone. And if you guys haven't done it, do it. Go to levinlabs.io. Everyone in this room, for just, I think it's like $30 a month, may get your company pay for it. Create a voice clone of yourself and play with it. It may scare you, but voice cloning on 11labs.io is the best audio cloning system out there, and it's a very practical thing to try to experiment with.
Yeah, and there was an article in The Atlantic talking about the risks of voice cloning, and then I was listening to another article in The Atlantic's app, and I noticed that it was powered by an 11 Labs AI voice. And I thought, that's an interesting contradiction between the editorial team, what they're writing, and what the business team has decided to do to save money. So you mentioned folks thanking you for the coverage that you have. Each one of you gets thanked a lot for helping navigate this world of new media through your research, through the way you show up to share information, through navigating the business environment. And I want all of us to say thank you for being part of a great discussion today. Please help me thank the panel. And big thanks to the Embassy of Austria for hosting us. We're just so pleased at Social Driver and National Digital Roundtable to have this partnership. You will all hear from us, and we'd love to hear your ideas for future events and discussions and experts that we can bring together. Chief Influencer is a production of Social Driver. We help clients transform complexity into clarity with people-centered strategies. Whether you're looking to elevate the influence of your brand or of your leaders, check out socialdriver.com to learn more. For show notes or to nominate a guest, visit us at chiefinfluencer.org or follow Chief Influencer on LinkedIn.